"Hands up! We know what you're hiding!" the officer bellowed through the bullhorn, his gun leveled at the weathered fishing vessel drifting across Monterey Bay, California. Elijah Thompson, a 78-year-old fisherman with hands toughened by decades at sea, raised his arms slowly, his calm gaze fixed on the boarding Coast Guard officers as they leapt aboard, trampling his nets and knocking a photograph of his late wife into the water. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked, his voice low and steady, like the rhythm of the waves. They rifled through every nook and cranny, suspecting him of arms smuggling, but nobody expected that. Just minutes later, they would step back in shock and regret for having stopped the wrong man. What revelation about Elijah's true identity left those confident officers so stunned? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people tuning in from around the world. Elijah Thompson lived in a small wooden house near the Pacific Grove Pier. The scent of sea salt mingled with the sound of crashing waves. At 78, he was a silent figure. His silver hair fluttered lightly in the ocean breeze, his deep-set eyes seeming to hold the entire sea. His humble cabin, nestled among the pines, carried the mingled aroma of brine and rotting wood. Elijah lived in isolation, no telephone, no television, not even a radio to link him to the noisy world beyond. For him, the real world began only when he stepped down onto the pier. There, the waves lapped in steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of memory. His sailboat, the Hannah, named for his late wife, was Elijah's final refuge. Its hull had aged to a weathered hue. Cracks in the timbers told stories of decades past. Each morning, he would caress the wheel, his sinewy fingers tracing the meticulously carved letters of Hannah, as if touching a piece of a lost soul. He said nothing. He simply checked the nets, secured the lines, and pushed the boat out to sea. The familiar waters, where the waves glimmered emerald under the sun, were his unchanging destination. There, amid the vast expanse of ocean, Elijah found rare solace. The sea's gentle lap against the hull whispered soothing words, easing the invisible scars that war had left within him. In Elijah's mind, the ocean was not merely a place to fish. It was a gateway out of haunting memories, the echo of gunfire in the Ah Chow Valley, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the despairing eyes of comrades who never returned. He had once been a Marine, a soldier who survived the bloody battles of Vietnam, yet the cost of survival was endless nightmares. Each time he cast his nets, he sought not only fish, but to grasp whatever peace remained. The sea, with its vastness and stillness, understood him better than anyone. It did not judge or inquire. It only embraced the secrets he carried. The people of Pacific Grove knew Elijah only as the old fisherman, the polite, reserved elder. They saw him each morning, walking slowly along the pier, his worn cap shading his eyes. They greeted him. He returned a subtle nod, a fleeting smile, like a breeze. No one guessed that beneath that modest exterior lay a silent hero, one who had faced death and lived to tell the tale. Elijah did not need them to know. He had chosen silence, and silence had chosen him, an unspoken pact between him and the world. But in Elijah's heart, that silence was not an escape. It was his way of protecting himself, of keeping the fragments of his heart from scattering. Hannah. His wife, who had left him 10 years before, had once been the light guiding him through darkness. Now, only the boat bearing her name reminded him that he had loved, had lived, and had hoped. When he hauled the nets aboard, the fish gleaming in the sun seemed to carry a promise that today he was still here, still breathing, still fighting in his own way. The sea was where Elijah felt closest to Hannah. He imagined her standing at the rail, her golden hair shimmering as it did the day they met, her smile as warm as a summer sunrise. Those moments, though only phantoms, were enough to soothe the loneliness weighing on his chest. He asked for little, just a calm sea, just a full net, and just the memory of Hannah unforgotten. For Elijah, that was enough. So each day, he set out to sea, not to flee, but to find himself again. The Pacific Grove Pier, with its creaking planks, was where his story began anew every morning. And the ocean, with its boundless compassion, was where he entrusted his wounds, his dreams, and the secrets no one in Pacific Grove ever knew. Dusk settled over Monterey Bay. Elijah Thompson quietly cast his nets. The tranquil strait, with its small waves shimmering under the fading light, was where he often found rare serenity. The sailboat Hannah, named after his late wife, bobbed gently, as if singing him to rest through painful memories. At 78, Elijah was a stoic figure. His calloused hands clenched the net's rope, his deep-set eyes reflecting the vast ocean. He sought nothing more than this moment, when the waves drowned out war's echoes, when the salt sea breeze soothed his heart. But that peace, fragile as a dream, suddenly shattered. An engine's roar tore through the stillness. From the horizon, a Coast Guard cutter hurtled toward him, its bow cleaving the water violently and rocking Hannah like a leaf in a storm. Spray drenched the deck. Over the loudspeaker, Corporal Daniel Rivera's voice rang out, cold as a blade. "Hands up! We know what you're doing!" Elijah lifted his head. His calm gaze met the rifles' muzzles trained on him. 3 young officers, faces taut with tension, leapt aboard. Their boots trampled his nets, still redolent of brine. An old tackle box toppled, scattering lures across the deck. The small photograph of Hannah, affixed to the console, slipped free, its water-darkened edge fraying, as though his memories of her were under attack. Elijah raised his sinewy arms slowly. The scars of Vietnam whispered silent stories he did not wish to recall. He stood tall, back rigid, not a tremor in his stance. His eyes locked on Rivera. The corporal, sharp-eyed and suspicious, ordered a search, as if every inch of Hannah concealed a sinister secret. Within Elijah, there was no fear, only profound sorrow. He thought of the catch that had slipped through his nets, the fish that gleamed moments ago, now gone, taking with them the peace he had fought to hold. The ocean, his only companion, seemed to exhale alongside him. The officers rummaged through Hannah with frantic haste. Nets were yanked, fishing rods clattered against the hull, emitting dry, harsh clangs. One young officer, impatience etched on his face, yanked open a storage compartment, sending Elijah's old compass tumbling to the deck. The very compass he had carried since the days when Hannah still lived. He watched it roll. Pain flickered in his eyes, but he said nothing. He was no stranger to loss. He was used to the world intruding upon what he held dear. In his mind, he saw Hannah again, her gentle smile like sunlight, her warm voice soothing his nightmares of war. And now, amid this chaos, she felt further away than ever. Rivera stepped closer. His gaze swept Elijah as if searching for a confession. All he found was silence, a silence that unsettled him. Elijah did not resist. He did not question. He stood like a boulder in a river, letting the current of suspicion wash over him. He knew the real interrogations he had endured, under the rain of bombs in Vietnam, had been 1,000 times more brutal. These arrogant, hurried officers were but ripples compared to the storms he had faced. Yet the pain persisted, not from the guns aimed at him, but because Hannah, his final sanctuary, was being violated. In that moment, Elijah felt as though the sea itself watched. The waves still lapped, steadily, reminding him that this too would pass. He felt no anger. He harbored no resentment. He had learned, through years of war and loss, that anger only added weight to one's burdens. He simply wished them gone. He longed to return to his nets, to the ocean, to Hannah. But he knew the sea did not rush, and neither would he. He stood there, quietly waiting, like a soldier accustomed to long battles where victory comes not from force, but from patience. The Coast Guard officers, hurried and suspicious, tore through every corner of the aging vessel. Fishing rods, Elijah's companions on countless voyages, were tossed aside, clattering against the hull with harsh clangs. The tackle box, meticulously organized with lures and lines, was upended, its contents strewn across the wet deck. The small photograph of Hannah, affixed to the console like a talisman, slipped free, its paper edge blurred by seawater. Elijah stood motionless, his eyes heavy with sorrow as he watched the memory of his late wife desecrated, yet he spoke not a word. He merely let his calloused hands hang at his sides like a soldier long accustomed to invisible wounds. Within Elijah, a silent wave swelled, not anger, but profound sadness. He had faced fiercer battles under Vietnam's rain of bombs, where death waited every second. But here, aboard Hannah, the pain was different. It crept and smoldered, as if the world sought to unearth the memories he had buried. Memories of war, of Hannah, of himself. Corporal Daniel Rivera, sharp-eyed as a blade, stepped closer. His gaze swept over Elijah, searching for a confession. He interrogated with suspicion, demanding to know why Elijah appeared at this suspicious coordinate, alone, in the tranquil strait. Elijah replied, his voice as steady as lapping waves, that he was simply fishing, as always. But those gentle, honest words did not sway Rivera. The corporal ordered a deeper search, convinced that secret compartments aboard Hannah concealed weapons, or worse. The officers resumed their search with aggression. A young seaman, Collins, impatient, yanked open the storage near the helm. Elijah's old canvas bag tumbled out, revealing his boat license and a yellowed chart of Monterey Bay, its creases chronicling Elijah's innumerable outings. Rivera picked up the documents, eyes scanning each line as though every word pointed to guilt. Yet all he saw was the name Elijah Thompson, a 78-year-old fisherman, nothing more. Rivera's suspicion remained unquenched. He watched Elijah, waiting for a crack, a spark of panic. But Elijah offered nothing but silence, a profound silence that unnerved Rivera. Elijah did not resist, did not protest. He stood there, like a boulder in a river, letting the current of accusation wash over him. In Elijah's mind, the Hannah was more than wood and sail. It was a sanctuary, where he found Hannah again in every wave, in every haul of the nets. Each scratch on her hull was a story. Every tool aboard was a memory. When the officers violated her, they did more than knock over a photograph or spill a tackle box. They were trampling upon what was most sacred to him. Yet Elijah did not allow his anguish to show. He had learned, through years of war and loss, that anger only weighed the heart down. He stood silently, his gaze fixed on the sea where horizon met dusk. The waves still lapped steadily, reminding him that all things pass. Elijah thought of Hannah, her smile like summer sunshine, her voice soothing him through nightmares. Now, with her photograph lying on the wet deck, he felt her further away than ever. But he was not afraid. He knew the sea kept what truly mattered. He needed only to wait, as he had waited through battles, through sleepless nights. The officers, with their arrogance and haste, could not understand him. They did not know that Elijah had endured far harsher interrogations, where life itself hung in the balance. Compared to those days, this moment was but a passing breeze. He stood there, silent and patient, like a soldier accustomed to long campaigns, where victory comes not through force, but through endurance. Dear beloved audience, please take a moment to relax or sip a glass of water, and then continue listening, for more surprising developments lie ahead. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from around the world. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we can continue bringing you more great tales. Tension aboard the Hannah rose like waves before a storm. Corporal Daniel Rivera, his eyes cold and his voice laden with suspicion, clutched the radio, demanding a background check on Elijah Thompson. He stood there on the drenched deck, convinced that the elderly man before him was hiding a crime. The other officers continued their frantic search, their hurried motions tearing through the boat's silence. An old coffee thermos, Elijah's companion on every voyage, was knocked over, its dark liquid seeping across the wooden planks. A white ceramic mug, the last gift Hannah had given him, tumbled down and shattered into sharp fragments. The crisp crack of breaking porcelain sliced through Elijah's heart, yet he remained motionless. He stood straight-backed, his gaze fixed on the sea where the horizon bled into fiery orange. Within him there was no fear, only a dull ache, as though his memories of Hannah were once again being violated. Elijah was no stranger to fiercer storms. The years in Vietnam, under the rain of bombs at Khe Sanh, had taught him to stand firm at the brink of life and death. These officers, with their arrogance and haste, were mere breezes compared to the tempests he had faced. Yet sorrow crept in, not because of guns or accusations, but because the Hannah, his final refuge, was being trampled. Each shard of broken mug, each stain of coffee on the deck, marked a scratch upon what he cherished most. He thought of Hannah, her gentle smile like sunlight, her soft hands offering him that mug on a summer morning. Now she felt farther away than ever, but Elijah would not let his pain show. He stood there, like a rock in a river, letting the current of suspicion wash over him. The officers continued their work, rifling through every corner of the Hannah. A young sailor, face tight with stress, yanked open another locker, sending a frayed coil of netting tumbling to the deck. Rivera, radio still clutched in hand, stared at Elijah, searching for a crack, any sign of panic. But Elijah offered nothing but profound silence, an unsettling stillness that left Rivera uneasy. In Elijah's mind, the sea watched on. The waves lapped steadily, reminding him that all things pass. He had learned, through countless sleepless nights after the war, that patience is the most powerful weapon. He stood there, gaze fixed on the water, as if in conversation with Hannah, with the waves, with himself. Suddenly the radio crackled, shattering the stifling hush. The base commander's voice came through, sharp as a blade cutting through mist. "Corporal Rivera, cease immediately. You are on the vessel of Sergeant Elijah Thompson, U.S. Marine Corps, recipient of the Medal of Honor for saving 18 comrades at Khe Sanh, Vietnam." Silence fell, heavy as a stopped storm. The officers froze, hands slackening, their eyes shifting from suspicion to disbelief. Rivera's face went pale. His fingers tightened on the radio as if clinging to the last shreds of pride. The commander pressed on, voice unyielding. "Your coordinates were wrong. The real target, a weapons smuggler, was apprehended 8 nautical miles away." The words struck like a hammer, shattering Rivera's confidence and that of his men. They recoiled, faces full of regret as they realized they had insulted not just an old fisherman, but a war hero. Elijah remained unmoved, expression unchanged, as if the revelation was nothing more than a ripple on the water. He did not need them to know who he was. He did not need their belated respect. In his heart, there was only the sea, Hannah, and the shards of that white ceramic mug. He thought of the comrades he had saved at Khe Sanh, their faces forever etched in memory, and the scars he carried. This misunderstanding, painful though it was but a fleeting moment compared to all he had endured. He stood there, silently, like a soldier accustomed to long campaigns, where victory does not come from apologies, but from endurance and letting go. The arrogance of Corporal Daniel Rivera dissolved like breath in a cold wind just minutes after he realized his mistake. Only moments ago, he had stood aboard the Hannah, eyes steely, convinced that Elijah Thompson was a criminal deserving punishment. Now the truth lay bare. Elijah was a war hero, a Marine who had saved 18 comrades at Khe Sanh, honored with the Medal of Honor. Shame engulfed Rivera, heavy as a debt that could never be repaid. His hands trembled as he ordered the retreat, leaving Hannah in chaos, nets tangled, lures scattered across the deck, and shards of the white ceramic mug, Elijah's last gift from Hannah, glinting in puddles of water. Rivera walked away, gaze cast downward, as though fleeing himself. Yet inside, a fresh wound had opened. The knowledge that he had insulted not merely an old fisherman, but the very values he had been taught, the lessons from his grandfather, also a Marine. The next morning, Rivera returned alone to the Pacific Grove Pier, where Elijah carefully mended his nets. The old man's sinewy hands tied each knot with deliberate slowness, as if patching tears in memory. Rivera stood in silence. Yesterday's suspicion had given way to remorse. His voice shook as he admitted his error. He spoke of his grandfather, who had shared stories of courage and honor, stories that had shaped Rivera since childhood. But yesterday, aboard Hannah, he had betrayed them. His apology caught in his throat, each word a difficult step toward atonement. Elijah listened without looking up, only a slight nod, his gaze fixed on the nets. He did not need words of regret, yet he understood the value of sincerity. With a simple gesture, he invited Rivera aboard. They set out to sea. Hannah bobbed gently on the waves. Elijah handed Rivera an old fishing rod that had belonged to Hannah, its wooden shaft worn smooth by time and voyages. Rivera took it, his fingers tracing the scratches, almost feeling the warmth of the woman he'd never known. Elijah guided him, not with many words, but through slow, deliberate movements, how to bait the hook, how to secure the line, and when to wait. Rivera, accustomed to orders and haste, began to learn patience. He watched Elijah, this man with ocean-deep eyes, and realized that this trip was more than fishing. It was a journey of healing. In Rivera's heart, shame still smoldered, yet it was yielding to respect, not only for Elijah, but for the values he had forgotten, the lessons from his grandfather about integrity and responsibility. Rivera tugged the rod. A small fish bit, its silver scales flashing in the sunlight. He smiled, a rare smile, but Elijah shook his head gently. He told Rivera to release it, his voice low as a whisper. It needs time to grow. Rivera crouched, freed the fish, and watched it swim away until it vanished. In that moment, their reconciliation formed an invisible bond, deeper than any words. Rivera felt a lightness spread through him, as if he had just released not only the fish, but also the heavy burden of his guilt. He looked at Elijah, the man who had endured war, loss, and insult, yet chose forgiveness, and understood that Elijah's silence was a lesson, wordless, but etched deep into Rivera's soul. Elijah sat quietly, his gaze fixed ahead where memories of Hannah still lived. He thought of her, of the days they sailed together, of how she taught him that forgiveness keeps the heart light. He said nothing, yet Rivera felt that lesson, in Elijah's patience, in the way he held the rod, in the way he released the small fish. In Rivera's heart, memories of Quezon, of lost comrades, of Hannah remained, but they no longer weighed him down. Elijah had learned to let go, and now he passed that lesson on, not in words, but through the way he lived. They returned as the light grew golden. Rivera stepped off the boat. His eyes now shone brighter, as if he had rediscovered a part of himself. Elijah secured the vessel, his hands steady, his gaze serene. To him, today was no different from any other. But somewhere in the stillness, he felt Hannah smiling, as though she, too, witnessed the moment two souls, once in conflict, found one another. That day aboard the Hannah, Elijah Thompson and Daniel Rivera caught no large fish, but both understood that this voyage was not about fishing. It was a quiet journey, where invisible wounds were soothed, where two men, once in conflict, found a fragile yet profound bond. Elijah, the 78-year-old with ocean-deep eyes, sat in silence, his sinewy hands grasping Hannah's old rod. Rivera, the young corporal still bearing yesterday's remorse, stood by his side, eyes following every motion of the old fisherman. In that stillness, no words were needed. Their presence and the boat's gentle sway spoke volumes. Elijah began to share, his voice low as a whisper from the depths of his soul. He spoke of Hannah, the woman whose gentle smile had guided him through war's nightmares, who had taught him that forgiveness is how one keeps the heart light, how pain drifts away like debris after a storm. The sea holds nothing for long, he said, his tone in rhythm with his breathing, but it teaches us to let things pass. Those simple, weighty words struck Rivera like a soft hammer blow. He listened, feeling each syllable cleanse the guilt lodged in his heart, as though washed by the tide. He thought of his grandfather, also a Marine, who had instilled in him lessons of honor and duty. Yesterday, aboard the Hannah, he had betrayed those lessons. Now, through Elijah, he found a chance for redemption. Rivera bent down, rod in hand, his fingers tracing the scratches on its wooden shaft, marks of Hannah's voyages and memories. Elijah guided him, not with many words, but with slow, deliberate gestures, how to bait the hook, how to wait. Rivera, accustomed to orders and haste, began to absorb the lesson of patience. He watched the old man who had endured war, loss, and insult, yet chose forgiveness. Elijah's calm was not weakness, but the strength of one who had learned to let go of burdens Rivera still carried. When Rivera lifted the rod, a small fish bit. Its silver scales flashed in the light. He smiled, a rare moment of relief. Yet Elijah shook his head gently. He told him to release it, his voice a reminder. It needs time to grow. Rivera knelt, set the fish free, watched it dart away. In that instant, he realized he too needed to grow up, not merely as an officer, but as a man. Releasing the fish was more than obeying Elijah. It was a pledge to himself to correct his mistakes, to live with honesty and humility. Elijah sat quietly, eyes serene, but a spark lit within him, as if Hannah watched and smiled. Elijah thought of her, of the days they sailed together, of how she taught him that forgiveness is not forgetting, but choosing to keep the heart light. Memories of Khe-San, of comrades he saved, of sleepless nights, remained, but they no longer weighed him down. He had learned to let them drift away like small fish returning to freedom. Now he passed that lesson on to Rivera, not in words, but through stillness, through the way he held the rod, through the way he released the fish. Rivera felt it, a lightness creeping in, as though he, too, had reclaimed a part of himself lost in arrogance and haste. They returned as the light grew radiant. Rivera stepped ashore. His eyes shone brighter, as if he had found a new path. Elijah secured the Hannah, his hands slow, his gaze calm. To him, today was no different from any other. He needed no recognition, no thanks. Yet in that silence, he felt Hannah's presence, as though she, too, witnessed the moment two men, once in conflict, found one another. Their story, small though it was, proved that even the deepest wounds can heal if we learn to let go and trust time's gentle remedy. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see viewers tuning in from around the world. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story so we can continue bringing you more great tales.